Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
In her blue dress, with her cheeks a little red, her blue eyes, and her gold hair pinned up like it was for the first time, pinned up to be out of the way, Mrs. Raddick's daughter looked like she had just come from the bright sky. Mrs. Raddick's shy, surprised, but very loving look showed she believed it too. But the daughter didn't seem very happy. Why would she? To be standing on the steps of the casino. In fact, she was bored like heaven was full of casinos with old saints as workers and crowns as toys to play with. "You don't mind taking Henny, do you?" asked Mrs. Raddick. "You don't mind? There's the car and you'll have tea and we'll be back here on the step, right here in 1 hour. You see, I want her to go in. She has not been here before and it's worth seeing. I feel it wouldn't be fair if she didn't go." "Oh, be quiet, Mother," said the daughter, tired. "Come on. Don't talk so much. And your bag is open. You'll lose all your money again." "I'm sorry, dear," said Mrs. Raddick. "Oh, do come in." "I want to win money," said the daughter's impatient voice. "It's all fine for you, but I don't have any money. Here, take 50 francs. Dear, take 100. I saw Mrs. Raddick giving her some money as they walked through the doors. Henny and I stood on the steps for a moment, watching the people. He had a big, happy smile. "I say," he said, "there's an English bulldog. Are they allowed to take dogs in there?" "No, they're not. He's a cool dog, isn't he? I wish I had one. They're so fun. They scare people a lot, but they're never angry with the people they live with." Suddenly, he grabbed my arm. "Look at that old woman." "Who is she? Why does she look like that? Is she a gambler?" The old woman, wearing a green satin dress, a black velvet cloak, and a white hat with purple feathers, slowly walked up the steps like she was being pulled up by strings. She stared ahead, laughing, nodding, and making weird noises to herself. Her hands held tightly to what looked like a dirty old bag. But at that moment, Mrs. Raddick came back with her daughter and another lady standing in the background. Mrs. Raddick rushed to me. Her face was bright, happy, and she looked different. She looked like a woman saying goodbye to her friends at the train station with no time left before the train goes. "Oh, you're still here. How lucky. You haven't left. That's great. I've had the most terrible time with her," and she pointed to her daughter, who was standing completely still, with no emotion, looking down and moving her foot on the step, as if far away. "They won't let her in. I told them she was 21. But they don't believe me. I showed the man my wallet. I didn't dare to do more. But it didn't help. He just laughed at me. And now I've just met Mrs. Maswan from New York, and she won 13,000 in the private room, and she wants me to go back with her while her luck is good. Of course, I can't leave her. But if you'd..." At that moment, she looked up and gave her mother a terrible look. "Why can't you leave me alone?" she said angrily. "What nonsense. How dare you cause a scene like this? This is the last time I'll go out with you. You really are too awful. She looked her mother up and down. Calm down, she said very proudly. Mrs. Raddick was desperate. She really wanted to go back with Mrs. Mayswan, but at the same time. I took a deep breath and said, do you want to come to tea with us? Yes, she'll love that. That's just what I wanted, isn't it, dear? Mrs. Mayswan. I'll be back here in an hour or less. Mrs. Raddick rushed up the steps. I saw her bag was open again. So now it was just the three of us. But it really wasn't my fault. Henny looked very sad too. When the car came, she wrapped her dark coat around herself like she didn't want to be touched. Even her little feet seemed like they didn't want to carry her down the steps to us. I'm so sorry, I said quietly as the car started. Oh, I don't mind, she said. I don't want to look 21. Who would, if they were only 17? She gave a little shiver, the stupidity I hate, and being stared at by old fat men. Horrible. Henny quickly looked at her and then looked out of the window. We stopped in front of a huge palace made of pink and white marble, with orange trees outside the doors and gold and black pots. Would you like to go in? I asked. She hesitated, looked around, bit her lip, and then gave in. Oh well, there doesn't seem to be anywhere else, she said. Get out, Henny. I went in first to find the table, of course, and she followed. But the worst part was having her little brother, who was only 12, with us. That was the last thing she wanted, having a child following her everywhere. There was one table. It had pink flowers and pink plates with little blue napkins folded like sails. Shall we sit here? She tiredly put her hand on the back of a white chair. We may as well. Why not? She said. Henny squeezed past her and climbed onto a stool at the end. He felt really left out. She didn't even take off her gloves. She lowered her eyes and tapped her fingers on the table. When a soft violin played in the background, she winced and bit her lip again. Silence. The waitress came over. I was almost scared to ask her, tea, coffee, China tea, or iced tea with lemon. She didn't really care. It was all the same to her. She didn't really want anything. Henny whispered, chocolate. But just as the waitress was leaving, she called out carelessly, oh, bring me a chocolate too. While we waited, she took out a little gold powder box with a mirror in the lid, shook this small puff as though she hated it, and tapped her beautiful nose with it. Henny, she said, take those flowers away. She pointed with her puff to the pink flowers, and I heard her say quietly, I can't stand flowers on the table. The flowers must have been bothering her a lot because she closed her eyes as I moved them away. The waitress came back with the chocolate and the tea. She put the big cups of chocolate in front of them and handed me my clear glass of tea. Henny put his face into his cup, and for one terrible moment, he had a little blob of cream on his nose. But he quickly wiped it off like a little gentleman. I wondered if I should point out her cup to her. She didn't see it, didn't notice it, until, by accident, she took a sip. I watched nervously. She gave a small shudder. "It's so sweet," she said. A tiny boy with a head like a raisin and a body like chocolate came by with a tray of pastries, rows and rows of little sweets, little treats, little melt-in-your-mouth dreams. He offered them to her. "Oh, I'm not hungry at all. Take them away." The boy offered the pastries to Henny. Henny gave me a quick look. It must have been okay, because he took a chocolate cream, a coffee eclair, a meringue filled with chestnut, and a tiny cone filled with fresh strawberries. She could barely stand to watch him. But just as the boy started to walk away, she lifted her plate. "Oh, well, give me one," she said. The boy used the silver tongs to drop 1, 2, 3 pastries and a cherry tartlet on her plate. "I don't know why you're giving me all these," she said, almost smiling. "I won't eat them. I couldn't." I felt much more relaxed. I sipped my tea, leaned back, and even asked if I could smoke. When I asked, she paused, with her fork in her hand, opened her eyes, and really smiled this time. "Of course," she said. "I always expect people to smoke." But just then, something bad happened to Henny. He poked his pastry cone too hard, and it broke in two. One half fell on the table. "Oh no!" He turned bright red. Even his ears turned red, and one embarrassed hand slowly reached out to clean up the mess. "You awful little beast," she said. "Oh dear." I had to help right away. I quickly asked, "Will you stay abroad for long?" But she had already forgotten about Henny. She forgot about me too. She was lost in her own thoughts, trying to remember something far away. "I don't know," she said slowly, as if from another world. "I guess you like being here more than in London." "It's more. When I didn't finish, she looked at me, very confused. "More what?" "Well, more fun," I said, waving my cigarette. She needed to eat a whole cake to think about that. Even then, all she said was, "Oh well, that depends." Henny had finished his food. He was still feeling embarrassed. I quickly grabbed the dessert menu from the table. I say, "What about some ice cream, Henny? What about tangerine and ginger?" "No, maybe something cooler." "What about fresh pineapple cream?" Henny really liked the idea. The waitress was already watching us. She took our order, and just as she was about to leave, the girl looked up from her plate. "Did you say tangerine and ginger?" "I like ginger. You can bring me one." And then quickly she added, "I wish that orchestra would stop playing such old songs. We were dancing to that all last Christmas. It's so annoying, but I thought the music was quite lovely. Now that I paid attention, it made me feel warm." "I think this is a nice place, don't you, Henny?" I said. Henny said, ripping. He tried to say it very softly, but it came out as a high-pitched squeak. "Nice? This place?" "Nice." For the first time, she looked around, trying to see what was there. She blinked. Her beautiful eyes were curious. A very handsome older man looked back at her through a monocle on a black ribbon. But she didn't even notice him. It was as if he wasn't there at all. She looked right through him. Finally, the little spoon stopped moving on the glass plates. Henny looked tired, but she pulled on her white gloves again. She had some trouble with her diamond wristwatch because it was in the way. She tugged at it, tried to pull the silly thing off, but it wouldn't budge. In the end, she had to pull her glove over it. I could tell she couldn't stand being in this place any longer. She jumped up and turned away while I paid for the tea. Then we were outside again. The sky was darker now, and small stars were shining. The big street lamps glowed warmly. While we waited for the car, she stood on the step, just like before, twirling her foot and looking down. Henny ran forward to open the door, and she got in, sinking back into the seat with a big sigh. "Tell him," she said, "to drive as fast as he can." Henny smiled at the chauffeur, his friend. "Allez vite," he said in French, telling him to hurry. Then he sat down on the small seat facing us. She took out her gold powder box again. Once more, she shook the little puff and gave a quick, secret look at herself in the mirror. We sped through the black and gold town like scissors cutting through fancy cloth. Henny had a hard time trying not to look like he was holding on to something for dear life. When we got back to the casino, of course, Mrs. Raddick wasn't there. There was no sign of her anywhere, not on the steps, not at all. "Will you stay in the car while I go and look for her?" I asked. But no, she didn't want to do that. No way. Henny could stay in the car, but she didn't like sitting in cars. She wanted to wait on the steps. "But I don't really want to leave you here," I said softly. "I'd feel much better if I didn't leave you alone." At that, she threw back her coat and turned to face me. Her lips parted. "Good heavens, why?" I don't mind at all. I like waiting." Suddenly, her cheeks turned red and her eyes became darker. For a moment, I thought she might cry. "Elle, let me, please," she said in a warm, excited voice. "I like it. I love waiting. Really, really I do. I'm always waiting in all kinds of places." Her dark coat fell open, and her white throat, and her soft young body in the blue dress looked like a flower just beginning to bloom from its dark bud.